Hola, ¿cómo estás? Espero que estés súper bien. This is Tamara Marie, host of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Now, before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know about a special opportunity that you're definitely going to want to take advantage of, especially if your goal is to become fluent in Spanish. For a limited time only, my team is opening the doors to listeners of the podcast to take advantage of a free language coaching session. Now, in this session, it's not just we're teaching you about verbs or grammar, but we're really going to do a deep dive into what are your goals for learning Spanish, assess where you are on your journey to fluency at the moment, and help you map out a 90-day plan for how you can get to fluency. So we are going to help you take your Spanish to the next level, whether you're afraid of speaking Spanish or you just get a little bit nervous when you're talking to native speakers, or maybe you've got some of the basics down, but you really know that you struggle with getting your Spanish to flow and your listening skills aren't up to par. Whatever it is, even if it is a specific grammar issue, we will help you map out how to tackle that. And normally these sessions do cost, so we are offering a few slots for free. There are limited spaces available and they'll only be open up through the end of the month. So make sure you sign up. Go to SpanishConSalsa.com/coach. That's SpanishConSalsa.com/coach to book your free language coaching session where we will help you map out a 90-day plan to get to Spanish fluency. Okay, let's get started with the episode.
Bienvenidos. Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast,
the show for Spanish learners
that love music,
travel, and culture.
Close your grammar textbooks,
shut down the language apps, and open your ears
how Spanish is spoken in the real world.
Let us show you
how to go from beginner
to bilingual.
Here's your host,
certified language coach,
Tamara Marie.
Hola, bienvenidos al episodio 215. Welcome to episode 215 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. I'm your host, Tamara Marie, and today I'm answering a question from one of our listeners, Jude Livesey, who sent an email saying, "My main struggle is my foggy brain, as I am going through menopause and find it difficult to remember anything. I need to go over and over things to try and make it stay in my head. Many thanks, Jude Livesey." Well, Jude, thank you for reaching out and sharing this with us and asking your question. I know a lot of listeners can probably relate to this experience, especially if they're going through a similar phase in life, or if you're just someone who struggles with memory in general, right? Especially these days where our attention spans can be so short. Sometimes it can be difficult to get anything to stick to our memory, right? So today, I'm going to be sharing some practical research-backed tips to help anyone who's dealing with brain fog stay consistent and motivated while you are learning Spanish. So, Jude, I hope that you find these tips helpful. And we do have many successful stories of adult language learners who have been dealing with the fact that, as we get older, it can be a little bit harder to learn things. But I hope that this will help you realize that with going through some of these tips that it's not necessarily a sentence, right? Like just because you're learning as an adult does not mean you have an inherent disadvantage. But we do know there are some challenges, especially for the women in the audience who may be approaching that, perimenopausal phase where, anytime you're in your 40s, you're kind of going through this period where your hormones are all over the place, right? And that does impact your cognition and your memory as well. And a lot of people don't realize that. But I'm so glad Jude raised this question because it's something that is really common. And I think that as many people are looking to learn Spanish as we are older, are adults in life and not in school as children, that we are really looking for approaches that will work for us that may not have worked for an elementary school, middle school, or even high school student. So I'm so glad you asked this question, Jude. Before we dive into the topic today, I want to share a 5-star review that we received on Apple Podcasts from our listener, Carol Legg. So Carol says, "Interesting, unique, and fun. I listened to the first 4 episodes yesterday and love this. I've been learning Spanish using the Duolingo app, plus some shows on Netflix and some beginner stories in Spanish from the library. this podcast as a new method of learning. Tamara has a great voice, so she's easy to listen to. The content is interesting, and I love that the focus is Latin America, not Spain. I'm in Southern California, or she said SoCal, with a large Latino population, mostly from Mexico. Thank you for this podcast. And it's a smiley face heart emoji. So thank you, Carol, so much for taking the time to review the podcast. I'm so glad that you have found this helpful and interesting. And, if you also, like Carol, find anything you listen to on our podcast helpful, I encourage you to leave a review. It really does help other people find our podcast. You can go to learnspanishconsalsa.com/review. And you can leave your review and also just give us some feedback on how we're doing. We love to hear from our listeners. And as you can see from the question that we just got from Jude, it does help us inform what we talk about in the podcast. So we do listen to every message we get. You also can send an audio message on our website, learnspanishconsalsa.com, if you want to ask your question that way, or you can feel free to email us as well, just like Jude did. And we do try to answer as many listener questions as we can. So thank you so much, Carol, for that amazing review, and I hope you're still listening to our podcast. So now let's get into today's topic. So Jude mentioned brain fog, and specifically brain fog associated with menopause. But I'm pretty sure, like I said in the intro, that this is something that you can relate to, whether or not you are going through menopause, that some of us experience brain fog for a variety of reasons. But menopause specifically can bring a variety of cognitive challenges. And, we usually just call this brain fog. And it's this idea that we just feel like our minds aren't as sharp as they used to be. And, this includes difficulties with memory, focus, and even learning new things, especially like a foreign language like Spanish. But the good news is that there are ways to work around this, so you can continue making progress in your Spanish journey. So let's get into some specific things that we can do to combat this sort of cognitive decline. I hate to call it a decline, but it's a cognitive difference, right? As we're going through our brains maturing along with our bodies. That's a positive spin on it, right? All right. So first, let's talk about the importance of short, frequent sessions. So when you are dealing with brain fog, it can be tough to maintain focus for long periods of time. So trying to sit down for hours and hours can be a daunting task, right? Research supports the idea of spaced learning. So this is where you break information down into small, manageable chunks. And I've talked about this in previous episodes of the podcast, just when it comes to approaching learning Spanish in general. So I've talked before just about challenges with being neurodivergent, as well as any type of just time crunch that you're under, right? This can help. So not just for menopause, this is really a great strategy all around, but especially if you find that brain fog is an issue, it's going to be much more important to break things down into small, manageable chunks. There's actually a study published in the journal Psychological Science back in 2016 that suggests that what they call distributed learning, which basically is just their academic way of saying spacing out your study sessions, that actually improves long-term retention and comprehension. So instead of trying to cram a bunch of vocabulary in one sitting, it makes a lot more sense to spread it out over a week with having daily, smaller or shorter sessions. So short, frequent sessions can definitely help if you are dealing with brain fog. Another effective strategy is to engage multiple senses. So, for example, you can listen to Spanish music while cooking, like, learn Spanish con salsa. That is definitely one of the ways that I have found that works for me learning languages. You can also watch telenovelas with subtitles. Again, if you're more intermediate or advanced, this does tend to work better. I find that for beginners, this is a very frustrating experience because you're just not really picking up that much. But even if you're a beginner, you can sort of increase your exposure that way. But the important thing is that you're watching it, so you have a visual component. You're listening, right, because there's usually audio, and you're also reading the subtitles. This is engaging multiple senses at once. Also, writing out vocabulary by hand is a great way to engage multiple senses. And I always recommend that when you're learning vocabulary that you also listen to the words so you have the correct pronunciation. That's why with all of our courses at Spanish con Salsa, we really do try to make sure we always have an audio component so that you're not reading with what I call the little gringo voice in your head that is pronouncing things incorrectly. So writing out vocabulary by hand instead of just typing it while you're listening to the words is also another great multi-sensory, not multi-sensory, although it can feel like that when you're in menopause, right? But it's another multi-sensory approach that can help. There was a study in 2017 in neuropsychology that suggests that multi-sensory approaches help reinforce the language in your mind. So it says that this can actually enhance your memory and retrieval processes, making it easier to recall what you've learned. So you know how you have those moments where you're like, I know I studied all these words, but when you get in front of someone and you're trying to speak, then you absolutely forget everything that you studied, right? So using this multisensory approach can enhance your ability to recall things once you've already reviewed them. So try combining auditory, visual, and even kinesthetic or hands-on methods for learning Spanish to see what works best for you. Another thing that is really helpful is to practice mindfulness. And I know that mindfulness has been, growing in popularity in recent years. And there are actually studies that have shown that mindfulness practices such as meditation can significantly reduce cognitive symptoms associated with menopause. So yet another reason to start a meditation practice if there aren't already so many. So for instance, a study in the Journal of Clinical Psychology in 2018 found that mindfulness meditation improves attention, memory, and executive function in adults. So taking just a few minutes before your study sessions to meditate or practice deep breathing can clear out those mental cobwebs and prepare your mind for a learning session. And I wouldn't think of this as something really daunting. You don't really have to, dedicate an hour to sitting in the lotus position to meditate every single day. I suggest trying a few guided meditations, and I'll actually include a few links in the show notes to this episode. So if you go to learnspanishconsalsa.com/215 for episode 215 of the podcast, I'll include some links to some meditations in Spanish, because I also find that associating the Spanish language with a calming activity like meditation can be very, very powerful. And they're short, maybe 10-minute meditation. So again, this is not something you have to dedicate an entire ritual to, and sort of clear out your room and, burn incense. Like that's great if you're already doing that type of practice, but you can definitely incorporate some mindfulness and Spanish into your routine. And it can really help sort of reduce some of this brain fog that you might be experiencing if you are going through menopause or, again, just experiencing any other challenges that cause you to have brain fog. Now, another thing that can be super, super helpful if you are experiencing brain fog is physical activity. Now, this can be a really powerful tool because regular exercise has been linked to improved cognitive function, particularly in menopausal and postmenopausal women. So according to research published in a publication simply called Menopause back in 2020, moderate aerobic exercise enhances brain health by increasing blood flow to the brain and promoting the growth of new neural connections. So that's really important because I think a lot of us believe that, the best time to learn is when you're children because your brain is so open and you're a sponge. But you can actually still grow new neurons as an adult. And this is something that more recently, I know neuroscientists have been studying because they used to believe that once you were an adult, your brain cells just start to die off, but that's not true. And you can also build the connections between those neurons. So there's definitely some power to physical exercise, not only aerobic exercise, but also strength training, which has other benefits for women who are going through menopause, who may be experiencing osteopenia, losing both muscle and bone is something that happens and, ultimately can lead to osteoporosis, which, is a more significant deterioration in your bone mass. So there are other benefits to doing strength training and weight-bearing exercises, as well as the sort of neural cognition benefit that you get from physical activity. So, even just taking a brisk walk before you study can help boost your focus and memory. And, as you're doing these shorter sessions, as you're taking those breaks, physical activity is a great thing to do during your study breaks as well. So again, this is something that can really just help. Any tool that can improve when you're struggling to learn and remember things is great. And physical activity is one of the easiest, I think, that you can implement. A couple more things. So nutrition is also important. And I know this is starting to sound like a health podcast, but what you eat does play a huge role in your brain health. And brain health is directly related to experiencing brain fog, especially during menopause. So incorporating foods that are rich in omega-3 fatty acids like flax seeds, walnuts, or algae oil supplements, they can really help promote cognitive function, as well as eating, fruits and veggies, like especially fruits like blueberries. They are rich in antioxidants that can help with brain function as well. And of course, don't forget to stay hydrated. So even if you're mildly dehydrated, it can impact your concentration. And if you're not able to focus, you're not going to remember. So keeping a water bottle nearby while you're studying can really make a difference as well. Right. So those are some tips that can help if you're experiencing brain fog. And, there's a couple other things that I think you should take into consideration, right? Along with your nutrition and exercise, sleep is another crucial factor. Lack of sleep can exacerbate brain fog and make learning even more challenging. So back in 2020, the Sleep Medicine Reviews Journal, they published a study that emphasized that getting sufficient quality sleep is essential for cognitive processes, including memory consolidation and language acquisition. So, and I know sleep is something else that if you are going through perimenopause or menopause, that it can actually be an issue, right? Or if you've just had, some young children, right? If you have a baby in the house or you have a child that is waking up in the middle of the night, or you just, maybe you work a shift, maybe you're a nurse or a doctor and you have shift work that changes. Like there's so many reasons that sleep can become a challenge. And as we all know, this is an overall health issue, but when it comes to learning, it is also important to aim for at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night, because that gives your brain the rest that it needs to function optimally. And it's also during your sleep that you are actually consolidating the things that you learned during the day. So it is very important for learning the language as well. So just another reason to sleep, drink your water, eat well, and exercise, right? It definitely does also help with your language learning process. And lastly, as I always say, learning should be fun. So if you're experiencing brain fog, focus on what you enjoy in Spanish, whether it's listening to salsa or reggaeton, watching Spanish language shows on Netflix, or just reading about your favorite hobbies in Spanish or watching YouTube videos. This enjoyment increases engagement, and engagement improves learning because you will pay attention to things that you like, right? Very, very simple. And I know this sounds basic, but too many of us think that we have to suffer through reading a dry grammar textbook, or we just open whatever app on our phone someone told us would help us learn Spanish because it's free. And it'll give us reminders every 14 seconds, which also isn't helpful because too much interruption will not engage you. You will start to tune those things out. But either way, sometimes we just think we have to do it some traditional way, or we have to sort of go through the steps and learn how to say, hola, señora, ¿quieres una cerveza? Like everyone is like traveling on business and meeting women at a bar, right? That's how a lot of these Spanish language programs start, or they just focus on grammar. So there's no rule that says that you have to follow a traditional approach or that you have to learn something that you find boring. So I really find, and many people who listen to this podcast and we've worked with in our community at Spanish con Salsa, when you're learning Spanish with your favorite songs or activities, that it's so much easier and natural to pick up vocabulary and grammar. And it actually it feels effortless. And I know that sounds foreign, especially if you struggle to learn anything. But think about the things that you've mastered in life. Think about the things that you've become obsessed with. Like maybe, you were really, you're a sports fan and you're obsessed with like a football team or a baseball team or a basketball team. And you know everything about them. You know all the stats, you know all the players, you know when they were drafted and what rounds, right? It's not really hard for you to retain that information because it's something that you naturally are interested in. So the same thing goes for Spanish. You should definitely focus on things that you love. And I find that music is a great way to engage with the language for many, many, many reasons. And it's really what helped me learn Spanish as well when I struggled when I was learning Spanish in school. And it wasn't until I was an adult and I started learning on my own and traveling that I really found that the key for me to stay engaged and interested, even through learning like the most mundane grammar topic, was learning Spanish with music. So that's in fact one of the reasons that I created the Learn Spanish with Music course. So in that course, we use songs to help you learn vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. And it really makes it fun and memorable. So think about any time you had a great time in your life. Those are the most memorable times. Like you always remember that one vacation where everything went well, there weren't any delays, the weather was perfect, you were with people that you enjoyed spending time with. No one has to convince you to remember that, right? So think about things that you enjoy in life, and that emotional charge, which music also tends to bring with it, absolutely can help combat any brain fog because you are going to be engaged with something that you enjoy. So I encourage you, if you haven't already, check out our Learn Spanish with Music course. I'll include a link to it in the show notes page, or you can just go to SpanishConSalsa.com/course. That's SpanishConSalsa.com/course. And you can learn Spanish with songs from salsa to reggaeton. And it really does make it easy for you to immerse yourself in the Spanish language and culture with music. So again, if music isn't your jam, find something else that you enjoy, because that will definitely help with brain fog. So it's super important to, follow these tips if you find that you're struggling with learning Spanish and you just haven't figured out how can you be consistent. And if you've listened to this podcast for a while, that consistency is the key to language retention. So you have to set up a routine for yourself if you want to be successful adding Spanish to your life and actually being able to speak the language. So you can do this by setting small goals or reminders, even if it's just listening to a song or reviewing some vocabulary words every day. Every little bit helps, and keeping Spanish present in your daily life will build those language connections so that over time you will begin to master the language effortlessly. So Jude and anyone else out there struggling with brain fog, I hope you have found this helpful. Just to wrap up, we talked about some specific steps that you could take to deal with brain fog when you're learning Spanish. So 1 is to study in short, frequent sessions. 2 is to use a multi-sensory approach to learning. 3 is to engage in a mindfulness practice. 4 is physical activity. 5 is focusing on your nutrition and staying hydrated. 6, focus on enjoyment. 7, make sure you sleep well. And then also stay consistent with your learning. And one thing that can help you stay consistent is to be a part of a supportive community. So joining a community of language learners who share your experiences can provide the support that you need to really keep yourself going as you are finding it more challenging to learn the language and to stay focused. So if you are looking for that sense of community, I did want to mention that in our community here at Spanish con Salsa, we have our Spanish Fluency Club. And that's a great way to connect with other learners that are on the same journey as you. So we really do focus on building your conversational skills. And also those like topics that we mentioned earlier, as far as how to implement some of these things and to stay consistent. This is a space where you can share your progress and your challenges. So connecting with a supportive community is great. We will be opening the doors again in January. So if you're interested, make sure you sign up for our waitlist at SpanishConSalsa.com/join. That will definitely secure your spot, so you'll be the first to know, and you'll have a priority when we reopen our doors to new members. So once again, that is SpanishConSalsa.com/join. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast. I hope these tips really do help to keep you moving forward in your Spanish learning journey. So if you are experiencing brain fog, if you're going through menopause, or if you're just getting older, or if you're dealing with recovering from a brain injury, or you're neurodivergent, or you just, don't like studying and you didn't like school, I hope some of these tips will really help you continue to persevere so that you can move forward and really begin to learn Spanish in a more effective way for your brain. So as always, don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with any friends that you think might need it, and I hope that something that you heard in today's episode has helped you go one step closer from Spanish beginner to bilingual. Hasta la próxima.
Thank you for listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast at learnspanishconsalsa.com.